Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, Trump's team is taking shape with some familiar faces set to take over some key posts.
We're going to bust some election myths and we're going to look at what went wrong for the Democrats with strategist Julie Roginsky. But first...
President-elect Trump is due to meet with President Biden at the White House tomorrow as the transition gets underway. It's a pleasantry Trump denied Biden 4 years ago when he falsely claimed to have won the 2020 election. Biden, meanwhile, has been striking a philosophical tone since the election while also defending his record.
I know it's a difficult time. You're hurting. I hear you and I see you. But don't forget all that we accomplished.
And as the results of last week's poll continue to trickle in, Trump has swept the 7 battleground states, claiming 312 electoral college votes to 226 for Kamala Harris. Trump also leads in the national popular vote by around 2 percentage points, although that margin is closing a little as all the votes from California are gradually being tallied. All of those numbers do add up to a comfortable Trump win. It certainly was, although Democrats can console themselves in the knowledge that the margin in the 3 decisive blue wall states was much closer. Pennsylvania was Trump's easiest win, a margin of just under 145,000. Michigan, a margin of 80,000. Wisconsin, fewer than 30,000. In other words, change 130,000 minds and Kamala Harris would be heading to the Oval Office and not Donald Trump.
That could have just been the Amish, John. Although states like Pennsylvania might have been Trumpier than we think, given the kinds of campaigns that Pennsylvania State House Democrats needed to run to eke out their 1-seat majority. We're talking about ads like this.
Amy Bradley misled us about the hospital. Now she was caught tricking President Trump to endorse her, hiding from Trump her secret Vision 2025 plan. Bring Afghan refugees to Cambria County. Hand them local jobs. Their housing paid for by taxpayers. President Trump supports secure borders and putting America first. But Amy Bradley doesn't. It's time to tell Amy Bradley, you're fired. Get out of here.
So that's an ad for a Democrat against a Republican. Having said all that, the Democrats could comfort themselves with the knowledge that not just were those key states where Harris campaigned hard, not only were they closer than the other states, they also swung only a point or two since 2020 to Trump, much less than the 6-point swing for the rest of the country. So that does suggest that Harris's campaign wasn't necessarily the problem. Democrats have also pointed to this graph here. It's a bit complicated, bear with me. This shows elections from all around the world through history. Each dot there shows how an incumbent party did that year compared to their previous election. So if you're below the line, you did worse than your previous election. If you were above the line, you did better. And you can see throughout history, there has never been a year where every single election incumbent went worse than their previous result until this year. It was a graveyard for incumbent parties, John.
If you say so, it just looks a little bit pretty to me.
It is beautiful. So Democrats are saying, look, it's not our fault. It's just the post-pandemic period that got us, that's all. Maybe so, but I can't help noticing that when you have a president as unpopular as Biden, you tend to lose elections. I've got another graph for you, also complicated, I apologise. This is showing how presidential approval ratings in June correlate with election outcomes since 1952. Now look, it was 40% Biden's approval in June, and in fact it still is. If we draw a line up to the graph and then go across, we can see what it predicts as the outcome in this election, and the predicted vote was about 48.5%. Guess where Harris is looking like she's going to end up? 48.5%, almost perfectly.
That's what I was going to guess, yes.
So, does that mean then that this is just all Biden's approval rating? It's just his fault and nothing else? Maybe. We'll come back to that. Oh. In the meantime, what about the pollsters? How about accountability for them?
Yes.
Did they predict a comfortable Trump win? No, they didn't. Well, actually, they kind of did.
Really?
This is 538's summary of all their simulated possible outcomes for the election. And you can see the tallest column, the one with the most outcomes, the most likely scenario, was the exact result that just occurred to the Electoral College vote, perfectly. Furthermore, in 6 of the 7 main swing states, they're not counting Arizona because they're still counting the votes there, 538 found state polling averages missed the mark by just 2.2 points this year, which is the lowest state polling error in 25 years. By comparison, 2016 and 2020 saw an average state-level polling error of about 4.7 points. That's more than double. So the predictors mostly did well. Well, with one major exception, John. You know where this is going.
Sure.
Professor Allan Lichtman, who spent the last 6 months, including on our show, confidently, some might say smugly, declaring that Harris was going to win for sure under his system involving his keys. And then when he was asked to account for that bad call, this is what he said.
The keys depend upon a rational, pragmatic electorate deciding based on governance whether the incumbent party should get 4 more years.
You see, John, the people weren't rational enough. They made a bad decision. Lichtman's keys, that was spot on. But the people were wrong.
Yeah, that's right. My horse tipping system is 100% accurate. It's just the horses keep letting me down. Trump allies, meanwhile, are lining up for possible administration roles this week and talking up the prospects of a new, less divisive era.
And I do think we have to get back to a place after this election, after that decisive victory, which I do think was a gift to the country, get back to a place where ordinary Americans who might have voted differently amongst their family members or their colleagues or their neighbors to be able to get together at the dinner table and say we're still Americans at the end of this. That's very much Donald Trump's headspace.
Good to know, because this has been Donald Trump's headspace recently.
When this election is over, based on what they've done, I would have every right to go after them. And it's easy because it's Joe Biden. Well, revenge does take time, I will say that.
It does.
And sometimes revenge can be justified.
And revenge against some of his former Republican rivals and critics is already being meted out. Despite backtracking and endorsing Trump for re-election,
I will not be inviting former Ambassador Nikki Haley or former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to join the Trump administration, which is currently in formation.
So Nikki and Mike can keep walking, but we do know that Trump's new team will include his co-campaign manager, Susie Wiles. She's a veteran Florida political operative who's set to become the first woman ever to serve as White House Chief of Staff. She's been working with Trump for almost 4 years already, so maybe she'll last longer than the 4 chiefs of staff that he burned through in his first 4-year term. When Donald Trump is sworn in for a second term next January 20, he will have a Republican Senate majority to work with, and to confirm some of his cabinet posts, Democrats had expected to lose the seat in West Virginia vacated by Joe Manchin, and they have. He'll be replaced by former Democrat Governor turned Republican Jim Justice. Democrat John Tester has also lost his seat in Montana to former Navy SEAL Tim Sheehy, and Ohio Democrat Sherrod Brown has finally gone down in the most expensive Senate race in history to Trump-backed Republican Bernie Moreno at a cost of $441 million for one Senate seat. Republican Dave McCormack has also managed to flip the Senate seat held in Pennsylvania by 3-term Democrat Bob Casey. Casey is a Pennsylvania blue blood. He's the son of a former governor there, but it wasn't enough to keep him in office. Still, Democrats are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief in some other battleground states, with Alyssa Slotkin winning a tight race to become Senator from Michigan, Tammy Baldwin hanging on to her seat in Wisconsin, Jackie Rosen winning again for the Democrats in Nevada, and Ruben Gallego has defeated Carrie Lake in Arizona. That was the seat vacated by Democrat turned independent Kirsten Sinema. Still, that all means that the Republicans have got a pretty good 6-seat Senate majority. And for the first time ever, it's also worth noting that 2 black women will be serving in the US Senate at the same time. Delaware electing Lisa Blunt Rochester, and Maryland has sent Angela Also Brooks to the Senate. They're both Democrats. Kamala Harris was only the second ever woman of colour elected to the Senate. The first, Carol Moseley Braun, was on Planet America's Fireside Chat with us last Friday. The House of Representatives, meanwhile, is still a very close contest. Republicans went into this election with a very small margin of just 4. You need 218 seats for a majority, and currently they are right on the brink. 217 confirmed. Some estimates are already putting that at 221, 222. The Democrats have been called as winners in 208 cases at the moment. Now, Republicans will want to have a bit of a buffer on top of that, though, because several House members are likely to be joining the Trump administration, and that will cause temporary vacancies. The first of those is Elise Stefanik of New York. She has accepted Trump's offer this week to become their next ambassador to the United Nations. She's also followed by Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, who becomes National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. He's been a prominent critic of NATO and pretty hawkish on China, so there might be a bit of a clue there, but maybe that's also going to be counterbalanced by America's next top diplomat, which is likely to be former Trump rival, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. That's according to reports in the New York Times and elsewhere. Trump has also handed the crucial immigration post of Homeland Security Secretary to South Dakota Governor Kristi. You know her, the one who shot her dog and a goat. There are also reports today that Matt Whitaker will be the new Attorney General of the United States, and John Ratcliffe, the former Director of National Intelligence, is going to be the head of the CIA. And he's somebody who's worked very closely with Donald Trump, so it might restore a little bit of trust there as well. And just in case those picks were getting a little bit, qualified, conventional for your tastes, Fox News host Pete Hegseth is going to become the Secretary of Defence. Mike Huckabee, meanwhile, is going to be heading to Israel as the next United States ambassador. The former Arkansas governor and presidential candidate. He's basically a Palestine denier, and yet he's going to play a key part in negotiating a peace settlement in Gaza. So we'll see how that goes. And earlier today, Trump had another major announcement.
I am pleased to announce the great Elon Musk, working in conjunction with American patriot Vivek Ramaswamy, will lead the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
And what are they going to do?
These two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy.
Meanwhile, Democrats are pondering what might have been and what went wrong for them.
Yeah, Harris raised over $1 billion during the campaign. Trump raised less than $400 million. Yet Harris ended up losing and somehow ended up $20 million in debt. As one former Biden staffer said, how do you spend $1 billion and not win? What the f***? Well, as I said before, a lot of people are blaming Biden for that, but then others are suggesting the problems are broader than either Harris or Biden. Moderate Seth Moulton thinks that the Dems have moved too far to the left culturally. He said Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. His top aide resigned the next day after those comments, by the way.
I think Seth's going to be a Republican in 4 years.
He's on the way. Whereas Bernie Sanders says that Democrats, they've moved too far right economically. He wrote, "It should come as no great surprise the Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class has abandoned them." Which is a problem, by the way, because for the last 100 years, Democrats have never won the presidency without a working class majority, except for on one occasion, which was in 2020, when Biden only won 47% of the working class vote to 51%. But then, this election, Harris only won 44% of the working class votes. The Democrats have got themselves a serious problem there. And then there are the Republicans who are taunting Democrats about losing Latinos at a rapid clip.
They live in a bubble and in a world in which what they're selling, the Hispanic community is not buying. Hispanics want secure borders. Hispanics want economic opportunity. Hispanics don't want to be called Latinx. Hispanics want their cultures to be celebrated and respected. They don't want to be pandered to. They want to be Americans. And I think one issue that you constantly see is Hispanics want illegal immigration. It is not true. There are 1 million green card holders who come into this country every single year legally.
So many fingers to point. Luckily, our next guest has 10 of them.
Yes, so I believe. Julie Roginsky is a Democratic strategist and a long-time advisor to Democratic presidential and congressional candidates. Julie, welcome back to Planet America.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Julie, you can slice and dice the demographics, the racial, the gender, the socioeconomic trends in this 100 Ways to Next Tuesday, or you can simply say, this is about inflation. It affected everybody. Everybody's affected by the economy. What's wrong with that analysis?
It's not about analysis, except that inflation wasn't biting in the previous cycles, and yet we keep losing those voters. We just lost them at a much more rapid pace this time around. I will also say, look, she did very well among college-educated voters. They tend to be more affluent, so inflation wasn't that big of a deal to them. I don't mind paying a couple more bucks for eggs. It doesn't affect me as much, but it does affect people who live paycheck to paycheck. And that's something that obviously became a huge issue, and that does cut across the board. It doesn't explain, however, the very precipitous drop-off and the slow decline of support, as I said, from cycle to cycle among, certainly among Latino voters and others. And I think that's something we have to take a look at that goes beyond the economy.
Now, Julie, this degradation of the Democrat vote has been happening for a while, in particular with the Latino vote. Some might see the Latinos as a canary in the coal mine. So what in particular can we learn from the erosion of the Latino vote?
I think there's several lessons to take. First of all, they are traditionally more conservative with a small c than other voters. Second is they are sometimes first or second generation immigrants who care very much about small business, care very much about their bottom line and their pocketbooks, and Republicans have done a more effective job of speaking to those issues despite the fact that Democratic policies actually have helped them more. And that's something that I keep going back to, that Democrats have these incredible policies that truly benefited the very people who voted against us. Donald Trump, when he was in office the first time around, voted for a tax plan that benefited Elon Musk and a few other really wealthy people, but didn't benefit the middle class or the working class much. And we are not able to communicate that because Donald Trump won the working class and he's making inroads into the middle class despite that. And that's something that I think we have to really take a look in the mirror and consider that our policies may be good, our intentions are incredible, but our ways of communicating and explaining them are off-putting and turn off the very people on whose behalf we have served and run and tried to win elections.
And Julie, in the last week, Democrats have been very critical of Joe Biden's role in all of that. It's basically gone from thank you, Joe, to F you, Joe. How much of that criticism do you think is warranted?
I love Joe Biden. I'm not going to criticize him, and not because I'm some blinder Democrat, but I think Joe Biden has had one of the more successful administrations, at least in my lifetime, and I've been around a while. So I don't want to be critical of him other than to say that Joe Biden was a transitional president and he should have acted like a transitional president. And I think the problem is that when you get into the White House and you finally have your dream come true, which Joe Biden has been running for that White House since 1988, it's very hard to give it up. And it's very hard for the people around you who've been with you a very long time to say to you, Mr. President, it's time to hang it up. I don't know anybody who's elderly who thinks of themselves as old. In their mind, they're still up to the task. And I think that that was the problem with Joe Biden. Despite that, I do think Joe Biden will be looked at historically as an incredibly accomplished president who did an incredible job turning this economy around. Our economy is the envy of the world.
And finally, Julie, the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party would say, less talk, more action. They'd say this should be all about policy. Look at AMLO in Mexico, they might say. He was hugely popular, even when facing more inflation than Biden was, because he was a genuine left-wing populist. And that is the way forward for the Democrats, they might say. Less Wall Street, less Mark Cuban, more rabble-rousing. What do you say to them?
Agreed. I think that that's not a Bernie Sanders wing of the party. That's what I keep saying, which is let's talk in language that people understand. When Kamala Harris hangs out with Oprah Winfrey and Lady Gaga, George Clooney, all these other celebrities, the average person doesn't think that we're in touch. We're just not. I mean, we don't look like we are in touch with normal people who don't hang out with Oprah Winfrey and Lady Gaga and George Clooney. And this is not a knock on those celebrities. It's just a fact of life. They don't live normal lives and they can't relate to normal people. Trump is hanging out with Hulk Hogan and all these wrestlers from the 1980s, which I can't believe I still have to think about. But at least those people kind of seem like regular guys. They don't seem like Oprah, who's really not a regular person, or George Clooney, who's got his big house in Italy. So from that perspective, I think we need to take stock of how we present ourselves, because we present ourselves as this wealthy coastal elite that works for the benefit of the rich and famous, or people who already have the haves, and as opposed to working for people who are the have-nots. Ironically, it is Trump's tax policy, not Biden's economic policy, that benefits the haves more than anybody else. And the fact that he got away with flipping the script just goes to show how good at it he is and how bad it is, how bad we are at responding to it.
Julie Roginsky, thank you for being with us on Planet America.
Thank you so much.
This promise was a cornerstone of Donald Trump's campaign to retake the White House.
I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
There are an estimated 11 million unauthorised immigrants in the United States, which is around where it's been for the past 25 years. And since Trump's victory, there have been protests in cities like New York, which is home to around 400,000 undocumented workers. Trump has compared his mass deportation plan to the policies of the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s.
The Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country, even larger than that of President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
A former general and Allied Supreme Commander in World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president as a moderate Republican in 1952.
You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president.
At the time, the American economy was in a post-war boom. There was a baby boom, a building boom, and a dizzying array of consumer goods were pouring off production lines once geared for making tanks and bombs and planes. Shiny new dream cars covered in chrome were suddenly affordable to average American families.
See the USA in your Chevrolet.
America was certainly on the move. There was also a boom in the number of Mexicans crossing into the United States for work.
Every 30 seconds, a so-called Mexican wetback enters this country illegally. The number is increasing. Some days, as many as 5,000 are caught and sent back in a single day.
During the war, Mexicans had been welcomed into America under the Bracero program to fill the farm and factory jobs left vacant by millions of American servicemen. Most never needed work certificates, and post-war, more Mexicans followed.
For you, senors and senoritas, there is plenty more where this cheese come from.
But with the GIs back home and the good times still rolling, the migrant workers were blamed for keeping wages low.
It is a manifest right of our government to limit the number of immigrants our nation can absorb.
So, in 1954, Eisenhower announced a crackdown known as Operation Wetback, a derogatory term for Mexicans sweating from their manual labours.
Guards round up Mexican workers without identity cards and start them on the road back home.
That year, US officials claimed around 1 million Mexicans were sent home, although the real figure may have been more like 300,000, and among them were American citizens of Mexican descent, rounded up in military raids, jailed and deported. So, that is Trump's blueprint. Although, at times, his rhetoric is more like one of the leaders that Eisenhower and America once fought to defeat.
And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country.
And there are fears, like Eisenhower, by mistake or by design, Trump will also target immigrants who are in America legally.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating They're eating the pets.
Well, it seems this week people have finally calmed down about voter fraud. Well, almost everyone has.
They just found a batch of new ballots, 40 million new ballots. Kamala Harris is president-elect.
Bullshit! She better not have.
But apart from her, something did change recently. In the last week of October, only 27% of Republicans had a great deal or quite a bit of confidence that their vote would be counted accurately. Yet strangely, the day after the election, 77% of Republicans thought their vote was counted accurately. I can't imagine what changed during that week. Note the Democrats didn't change by even 1%. Unfortunately, just because Republicans weren't concerned about voter fraud this year, though, it doesn't mean they've moved on. Because some were wondering, where did 20 million votes go? They're referring to the 20 million odd voters lost by the Democrats on that graph there since 2020. The theory being maybe since 2020 stood out so much on that graph, maybe that proves those 2020 votes were fake. Stop the Stealer, Dinesh D'Souza tweeted, Kamala got 60 million votes in 2024. Does anyone really believe Biden got 80 million in 2020? Where did those 20 million Democratic voters go? The truth is, they never existed. And former Russian patsy Benny Johnson agreed, saying, weird how more than 20 million Democrats just disappeared in a single election from 2020 to 2024. Super duper strange, man. Very sus. Thankfully, cranks from both sides could unite on this one, because lefty conspiracists thought this all implicated this year's election, writing things like, I spent my early career in computer security for the Navy and NSA. I'm beginning to believe our election was massively hacked. Think Elon Musk, Starlink, Peter Thiel, Bannon, Flynn and Putin. 20 million Democratic votes don't disappear on their own. Yeah, think of all them. And resistance tweeter malarkey tweeted, I hope in the coming days someone is able to explain how we had record turnout but 18 million fewer votes than 2020. Both of those things can't be true. You're right, malarkey wrote. Neither of those things are true. Firstly, there wasn't a record turnout this year, but secondly, more importantly, let's replicate that graph. Then let's stop committing graph crimes. Show the entire y-axis, please. Thank you very much. That looks less dramatic, doesn't it? And then let's recall that that graph was only day one's figures. Since then, there have been almost 20 million extra votes counted. There goes the arrow. Now, this doesn't really look all that mysterious at all, does it? And by the way, there's still 7 million more votes to come that haven't been counted. So they'll get even closer to 2020's numbers. Bottom line, John, sometimes bipartisanship sucks. And this is malarkey.
Clearly they got to you as well. It was Democratic President John F. Kennedy who famously observed, victory has 100 fathers, defeat is an orphan. Yet this week, as we've seen, Democrats have found no end of paternity for their latest defeat.
It's time for everyone's favorite post-election defeat show, the Blame Game.
You gotta blame Nancy Pelosi.
Blame Nancy Pelosi. People around Joe Biden are blaming Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi has partly blamed President Biden.
Democrats mostly going to blame Joe Biden.
Pointing the blame directly at President Biden.
Joe Biden.
I think it's too early to assign blame.
Everyone is to blame.
Everyone.
You say that sexism is to blame.
Blames Attorney General Merrick Garland.
They're just blaming Tim Walz?
Sexism. Merrick Garland. Tim Walz.
You could blame Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris has no one to blame but herself.
Kamala Harris.
Democrats even have their knives out for George Clooney.
George Clooney.
George Clooney is to blame. Even George Clooney receiving a piece of the blame. They're even blaming George Clooney.
That's right. The most blameworthy Democrat is apparently George Clooney. See you next election for more Blame Game.
And that is all for this trip to Planet America. We will be back again at 9:30 p.m. on ABC Television next Wednesday night.
And we're going to have a fireside chat on ABC News on Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as well. And both shows are on ABC, iView, YouTube and Facebook. See you there.
Bye-bye.